an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering oh my god, you guys. I know I'm going to eventually learn how to say this, so forgive me. It is the first episode. The Vorkosigan Saga, Book 1, Shards of Honor, Chapters 1, 2, and 3. In these chapters, we meet Cordelia, who has a really terrible thing happen to a camp full of nerds, it sounds like, and winds up having to struggle for her life and the life of her partner with an unlikely ally. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Sofia for commissioning this episode. Thank you, Sofia. If you are out there listening, really, really appreciate you. This snuck up on me, guys. I knew that y'all had commissioned this, and I don't know why, but I thought it started later on than it does in the year. I didn't think I started the series until like June. And I was really excited to see that this isn't what I was expecting at all. I don't know why, y'all, but I really thought from the title, Vorkosigan, it looked vaguely Nordic. And so my expectation was that this was going to be some sort of high fantasy set in a kind of, I don't know, maybe a Viking sort of setting. Vaguely. You know what I'm saying? Not even a little bit. And maybe eventually that feel will be there, but as of right now, I'm certainly not getting that energy. So I was actually really, really into these first 3 chapters. The writing took a little bit of getting used to because I've been reading a lot of things that are written in a pretty, what's the word I want? I'm not trying to say that they have no style to them, but the books that I'm covering right now tend to be very direct with their prose, and this is a little bit more flowery isn't quite correct, but there is a little bit more of description of the overall setting in a way that is meant to be very It's less like it looked like this and more poetic, I guess is the way I want to say it. And so I really had to let go of my initial reaction to that, which was sort of impatient, and be like, no, okay, this is what we're doing right now. It's just a different style. It's fine. So I'll just read the first sentences so you can get a vibe of what I'm saying. A sea of mist drifted through the cloud forest, soft, gray, luminescent. On the high ridges, the fog showed brighter as the morning sun began to warm and lift the moisture, although in the ravine a cool, soundless dimness still counterfeited a pre-dawn twilight. So do you see what I'm saying? It's just a little bit more involved. And we're with Cordelia Naismith. I hope I'm saying her name right. No, full disclosure, guys. For the purposes of Spoil Me, I often do audiobooks because it is really, I absorb information really, really well that way. And I find it difficult sometimes to sit and focus on just reading without my mind wandering, and I'll find myself I'm a paragraph down and I technically read the words, but I didn't comprehend. But today, I really felt like I wanted to start this reading the actual text. And that has resulted in me being in a position I'm not usually in, where I don't know how to pronounce a lot of the words that are used because I didn't hear the narrator say them. Normally I can go in and I can say things because the narrator said them and I just, absorbed that. But I haven't listened to the audiobook at all. I plan to. So probably by the next episode, I'm going to have the pronunciation of some things down a little bit more. As long as the audiobook narrator got those pronunciations correct, unlike some people who narrate books. Song of Ice and Fire narrator, I'm looking at you. So I may stumble over some of that initially. Forgive me. Hopefully the audiobook is good. We'll see about it. So she is on this trek with her botanist, Ensign Dubauer. Ensign is a name that I don't think I have ever seen before, but it strikes me as the kind of name that does exist. It's just one that's not super familiar to me. She usually calls him Dubauer, only later on. They go by last names a lot of the time, which I guess is sort of a thing in academic circles, as far as I can understand. So they are up at the top of this crest of a hill. He is super excited about these white flowers that are sort of look like lace. And she's just enjoying the view when she notices that there is this cloud of smoke. And I immediately, because she's like, what the devil can rosemont be burning to make a stink like that? And I was like, oh, I'm just going to hazard a guess that is rosemont burning. I just was being glib in my head, but I definitely figured, oh, something bad's happened to your people already. And indeed, we see a ship just depart with this urgency. And Cordelia is trying to get in touch with the people at base camp and nobody is responding. Vicky is in the chat saying, I think it's his title, military rank. Oh, Ensign's military rank. Okay. Thank you, Vicky. I really don't know anything about ranks. So sorry guys if I know that there are, the ways in which they are tiered also aren't necessarily the same from Army to Navy as well. Lieutenant is higher in one than the other. So I think a lot of my brain has just decided not to bother trying to memorize that kind of thing because it's just not consistent. But Ensign is one that I don't feel like I've heard. And I'm very curious to see how this all works out, because later on there's some talk about how they're technically part of the military and they're in uniform, but they don't have the training. So we'll talk about that in a second. Okay. So they run back to the camp and shit has been leveled and it's just absolutely burnt to a crisp, most of this stuff. And she eventually comes across a person who has been killed, is already dead, Lieutenant Rosemont, who we find out was her right hand and somebody that when she is thinking about the ship being without her later on, she had always assumed if she weren't on the ship that he would be there. So now that he isn't even there, she is very uncertain on sort of what to expect and how to proceed with some things. They have no idea what could have happened here, and they're being very cautious with the fact that maybe those people are still around. The ship took off, and I almost wondered at first if the ship was being stolen, but it turns out that those were what remained of her crew fleeing. So at least not everybody is dead, which is nice. So they go down to the a place that's a little bit out of view of the ridgeline, and they use this comm link to finally get in touch. And Dr. Ullery is the person who responds. Barayaran military patrol, again, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, surrounded the camp demanding surrender, said they claimed the place by right of prior discovery. Then some trigger-happy loon on their side fired a plasma arc and all hell broke loose. Reg drew them off with his stunner and the rest of us made it to the shuttle. There's a Barayaran ship of the general class up here we're playing hide and seek with, if you know what I mean. Remember, you're broadcasting in the clear, Cordelia reminded her sharply. Dr. Ullery hesitated, then went on. Right. They're still demanding surrender. Do you know if they captured Reg? DeBauer's with me. Is everyone else accounted for? All but Reg. Reg is dead. Stu, you're in command. Listen closely. Those twitchy militarists are not, repeat, not to be trusted. On no account surrender the ship. I've seen the secret reports on the general cruisers. You're outgunned, out-armored, and outmanned, but you've got at least twice the legs, so get out of his range and stay there. Retreat all the way back to Beta Colony if you have to, but take no chances with my people. Got that? We can't leave you, Captain. You can't launch a shuttle for pickup unless you get the Barayarans off your neck. And if we are captured, the chances are better for getting us home through political channels than through some harebrained rescue stunt, but only if you make it home to complain. Is that absolutely clear? Acknowledge. Acknowledged. But Captain, how long do you really think you can keep away from those crazy bastards? They're bound to get you in the end with the scopes. As long as possible. As for you, get going. So, they are on their own for the time being. And as she and Ensign are talking together, I'm just going to call him Ensign, which probably isn't correct. Maybe I should just switch to DeBauer since that's what she tends to call him. She and DeBauer are talking. All of a sudden, this dude steps out, a Barayaran soldier. I guess that she can recognize them by their fatigues. He comes out to attack. DeBauer is really fast, evidently, and shoves her behind him. She heard the crackle of a nerve disruptor as she pitched backward into the ravine, stunner and comlink flying from her hands. And she gets knocked out, wakes up, and there is a Barayaran there that I thought was the same dude. I assumed. Evidently not. She wakes up at one point, sees this guy, passes out again, and then wakes up again, and he is just sitting there. And she can't help but think, like, apparently the Barayarans have a really strict sort of appearance code, and he is looking pretty ragged in comparison to the standard that she is used to seeing from them. So she's like, it seems as if this guy has sort of been through it himself. She wakes up, vomits, because she's definitely got a concussion. And he says, I am Captain Errol Vorkozigan, commander in the Barayaran Imperial War Cruiser General Warcraft. Identify yourself, please. His voice was baritone, his speech barely accented. Commander Cordelia Naismith, Baton Astronomical Survey. We are a scientific party, she emphasized in accusation. Non-combatants. So I noticed, he said dryly. What happened to your party? Weren't you there? I was up on the mountain, assisting my team botanist. Have you seen my botanist? My ensign, he pushed me to the ravine when we were ambushed. Was he a brown-haired boy? Yes. There's nothing you can do for him now. And she yells that was murder, and I was thinking to myself, that does not sound like he's dead. It sounds like he's as good as dead. I almost wondered if that meant that he had been captured. But we find out what the deal is with him later on. He is in some bad shape, kiddos. Your expedition was to be interned, preferably peacefully, for violations of Barayaran space. Oh, that's going to be a tongue twister, I could tell. There was an altercation. I was hit in the back with a stun beam. When I came to, I found your camp as you did. So, this, it turns out later on. She thinks that, like, oh, one of my people took you down. But it does not seem like that is actually what happened. And she's really confused about why anybody would attack her camp. And his theory is that it was sort of a put on to camouflage someone's attempt to assassinate him. And they used the attack on the camp as an excuse to create chaos so that they could have him go down in the ensuing battle, and it would avoid suspicion, and they could say that one of the enemy did it. And he says, what orders did you give your ship when they informed you of their escape? I told them to use their initiative. A safe order to give a Baton. At least you're sure to be obeyed. Oh no, my turn. Hey, I know why my people left me behind. Why did yours leave you? Isn't one's commanding officer, even a Baryaran one, too important to mislay? If Reg couldn't hit the side of a house, who shot you? That's fetched him, she thought, as the stunner with which he had been absently gesturing swiveled back to aim on her. But he said only, that is not your concern. So we get the truth out of him a little bit later, because they do wind up having to open up to each other on the trail. So there, he's like telling her to get up, and at first she's like getting up and trying to see if she can walk, but then she stops and she's like, hold on, I'm not going anywhere till I buried my officers. And he says it's a waste of time and energy, but he doesn't, I noticed this right away. He doesn't just tell her absolutely not. He tries to convince her not to do it, which immediately made me kind of appreciate him more, because he could easily have just been like, the fuck you are, I have the gun, get fucking moving. But instead he's attempting to sort of like meet her halfway here and just be like, you have to know that's not the move, right? And at this point she says, your Baryaran thugs may know more about killing, but not one of them could have died a more soldierly death. I won't leave them to be scavenged like dead animals. So at this point she finds out that DeBauer isn't dead. He got hit by this nerve disruptor, which fucks with your brain. Evidently, she believes that the kinds of medical supplies that they could find later may be able to help him, and maybe he can recover. But the opinion of this dude is that basically I should put him out of his misery. One does not recover from disruptor injuries. So, you can't tell the extent of the damage your filthy weapon's done from the outside. He can still see and hear and feel. You can't demote him to the status of corpse for your convenience. His face seemed a mask. If you wish, he said carefully. I can put him out of his suffering. My combat knife is quite sharp. Used quickly, it would cut his throat almost painlessly. Or should you feel it is your duty as his commander, I'll lend you the knife and you may use it. Is that what you'd do for one of your men? Certainly, and they'd do the same for me. No man could wish to live on like that. It must be like living among cannibals to be a Baryaran. A long silence fell between them. I thought it was interesting that he doesn't contradict her. It's just sort of left, and there's a sense almost of him being like, yes, it is. I don't need to tell you that and agree with you, because what would be the point? You seem to know, and I also know, so I'll just let that lay there, is the kind of vibe I'm getting off him, you know what I mean? And this is when she gets him to admit that there are medical supplies, and she's like, I'll cooperate with you and assist with you when I can, if you will help me, like, take him with us. And he can walk, he just needs help. So he finally capitulates. They reached the edge of the glade as the last level light of the early evening was striping it with long black shadows. If I were by myself, he said, I'd travel to the cache on the emergency rations in my belt. With you two along, we'll have to risk scavenging your camp for more food. You can bury your other officers while I'm looking around. And she goes and like looks through stuff. He has to find something approaching a shovel. It's not great, but most things have been either taken or burnt. Everything, apparently this like plasma gun is their tents were made out of a material that, from what she's like thinking, should have stood up to most types of burning, like they're flame retardant, but something like that is just going to absolutely turn them to ash. So she managed to find two pouches, one that has oatmeal and one that has blue cheese salad dressing. And that's what they have to live on for like the next couple of days, which is terrible. It's not even real blue cheese salad dressing. It's artificial. I thought that it was like dehydrated, but it was real. But no, it's artificial. I can't imagine. And she's like, well, it's all high in calories, which is good. At least that we have calories. And the common, like, what a weird, I mean, I guess it's good they've got something, but so she starts to shovel and she's not making great progress. And finally he steps in and is like, go sit down. I will take care of this. So she's a little surprised by that, but the fact that he is out here helping her, like, again, I'm actually growing to rather like this guy. And the fact that he doesn't argue with her about his people not being as barbaric as she is saying also made me like him. And that he doesn't just try and bully her into doing what he wants. All of this was adding up to me being like, this guy's all right. Like, he seems like he's probably a pain in the ass by the book type, but also I like him. And I don't remember like how much of a description we get of him. I know it's heavy jaw and straight broad nose, I think is how he's described. I kept picturing the guy who plays Billy in the Twilight movies, the Native American guy. I can't remember the actor's name. He's been in a ton of stuff. And when he was young, he was hot. And I am picturing him in this role. And I do not know why I decided on Native American casting, but that's where I went. And I'm going to stick with it. I don't remember her being described either. I think she's got brown hair, but I don't recall. So they start talking about like the scavengers, and he's trying to estimate how deep he needs to dig. And she says that my chief zoologist found a couple of hexapeds, and they were dead and had been eaten by something he called a fuzzy crab. Now, she estimates that the ones from Earth are about as big as your hand. So he's thinking a meter down will be enough to bury your friends. But we meet them later, and that is not what we get. And she is a little bit salty about the fact that they were described the way they were. Here it is. Heavy jaw, straight broad nose, thick brows. Yeah, that's about it. I don't feel like skin tone is mentioned at all. But I'm going with that because that dude that actor, he plays like kind of stern, but kind in a way that works for me for this character. So this is when she hears something, and then they see the crabs coming toward them. There are 3 of them. They're the size of pigs. Yikes. And they really go for it here, and they have to like beat them off. And it is just one of those moments of like, if this is out there, what the fuck else is out there? He gets clawed in the leg, and that turns out to be a bit of an issue later on. Vicky says, I looked him up. Gil Birmingham. I can see that fan casting. Thank you for looking him up, Vicky. Gil Birmingham. That's his name? God. That doesn't, like, that's just that sounds so British to me. I'm like, that is indeed him, though. I'm looking him up. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, he's just, I don't know. He's got an energy that I've always rather liked. So the consensus here is that he probably needs to dig 2 meters deep. And I have to really emphasize, again, the fact that he was willing to volunteer 2 meters deep is probably necessary. She didn't have to request it, and he begrudgingly did it. He himself, I think your grave had better be a full 2 meters, he said seriously. Maybe a little more. And he's the one doing the digging, and he is volunteering to do, like, double the work. I was genuinely impressed at this point. So then, as they're about to bury this man, he's like, well, do you want to retrieve his clothing? Because maybe your friend who's still here could use some. So, because he's been shivering. There's a lot going on with him, but he's having these intermittent seizures. And when she first finds him, his mouth is bleeding because he bit his tongue, I think. So they bury her friend, and as they're leaving the camp, he asks her, like, do you still want to bash my head in with a rock? Because earlier she's like, why would you take me with you? And she admits, not at the moment. So they walk off together and begin down the mountain in the morning. She is assisting DeBauer, who is still managing to, like, she doesn't have to put her shoulder under his arm. She is able to hold him by the hand and still manage to walk on his own. This poor guy, it's what he's going through here. I really hope that he can recover adequately. And he is very afraid of Vorkosigan. He's like, it just recoils from him later when the man tries to help. I felt so bad for him. It's so pitiful, Radial symmetry was popular among the tiny creatures occupying the ecological niches held by insects on Earth. Some aerial varieties, like gas-filled jellyfishes, floated above the ripples and iridescent clouds like flocks of delicate soap bubbles, delighting Cordelia's eye. They seemed to have a mellowing effect on Vorkosigan, too, for he called for a break from what seemed to her a killing pace. We eventually find out that these things are vampiric, which is unfortunate. Don't love that. And they have like a sort of acid that burns. I mean, that makes sense. Jellyfish are not acidic, but stinging. So, that actually kind of makes some sense. But, oh, God. You guys, the point when one of them lands on the dude's face. Oh, dudes, it was so bad. It was so bad. I was so horrified by it. So here comes a point where she just says out loud, she's sitting with him as they were taking a break, I know who you are. Vorkosigan, the Butcher of Komar. What do you know about Komar? Just what everyone knows. It was a worthless ball of rock your people annexed by military force for command of its wormhole clusters. The ruling Senate surrendered on terms and were murdered immediately after. You commanded the expedition. Or was it you? I thought you said you didn't kill prisoners. It was. Did they demote you for it? Not for that. For the sequel. The sequel was more effectively suppressed. I had given my word, as Vorkosigan. They were to be spared. My political officer countermanded my order and had them killed behind my back. I executed him for it. Good God! I broke his neck with my own hands on the bridge of my ship. It was a personal matter, you see, touching my honor. I couldn't order a firing squad. They were all afraid of the Ministry of Political Education. That was the official euphemism for the secret police, Cordelia recalled, of which political officers were the military branch. And you aren't. They're afraid of me. A sour smile turned his lips. Like those scavengers last night, they'll run from a bold attack, but one must not turn one's back. I'm surprised they didn't have you hanged. There was a great uproar behind closed doors. But a Vorkosigan can't be made to disappear in the night. Not yet. I did make some powerful enemies. I'll bet. Did you, happen to turn your back on one of those enemies yesterday? Possibly. There are some problems with that theory, however. Like what? I'm still alive. I wouldn't have thought they'd risk starting the job without finishing it. To be sure, they'd be tempted by the opportunity to blame my death on you Batons. And there's a little bit of back and forth about Batons and the fact that they argue orders. And it's really sounding like they're meant to be sort of like the Americans in this universe, like the ones that don't stand on tradition and are more freewheeling, I guess. And the conversation ends with her saying, because he says, where do you suppose your ship is now? And she says, I suppose that depends on where your ship is. And they get back up and keep walking. So we have her puzzling over him and trying to remember what she can about Baryarans and like the way that their power structure works, but there's not a ton that she knows. The militarists of both parties maintained a bastard, uneasy alliance that controlled both government policy and the armed forces, but at heart they were natural enemies. The Emperor subtly stabilized the delicate balance of power between them, but there was not much doubt that on the clever old man's death, Baryar was destined for a period of political cannibalism, if not outright civil war, unless his successor showed more strength than was currently expected. She wished she knew more about the matrix of blood relationships and power on Baryar. She could give the Emperor's family name Vorbara, it being associated with the name of the planet, but beyond that, she was quite vague. So they continue on, and this is when they actually witness that bubble coming down and feeding on one of the radial creatures, sucking its blood. He calls them vampire balloons. And when they get to this spot where she almost falls into the water. Well, she does fall into the water, but she almost like gets swept away. And he manages to save her. And it was something, this moment was interesting because she initially holds on tight to keep him from falling. Cordelia convulsively tightened her grip on his arm and perforce went with him. So yeah, I like the fact that she goes down because she doesn't just let go of him. And then when she winds up down, he rescues her and is like, did you think I'd let you drown? And she says, well, at least we wouldn't be delaying you. And he just says, as if it bothers him that he has shown his hand by saving her. Or as if he is offended that she would think he would do that. It's unclear. It might be both, you know? So finally they come across this fucking hexaped, a huge one that she knows for sure is edible. And he manages to kill it. And there's this moment. I love this. Oh, good shot, cried Cordelia ecstatically. Vorkosigan grinned like a boy over his shoulder at her and jogged after his prize. Oh, she murmured, stunned herself by the effect of the grin. It had lit his face like the sun for that brief instant. Oh, do that again, she thought, then shook off the thought. Duty, stick to duty. Oh, really? All right. I like it. This is such a true thing. I know it's a cliche in writing, but there are some people that when they smile, it is just like they're a different person. And it is wonderful to have those moments with somebody that you otherwise kind of had written off. And then they smile and all of a sudden you're like, huh, wow, never mind. I was very wrong. So she tells him exactly how to kill it because he shot it and got it down, but it's not dead by the time they arrive. And they manage to cut the thing up and oh my God. And this is the part where they go back to the camp and DeBauer is standing there Gazing upward, blank and entranced, floating softly down toward his upturned face was a large transparent radio. She runs toward him, it settles over his face, and he flings up his arms. Vorkosigan grabs the thing and yanks it off. A dozen dark, tendril-like appendages were hooked into Dubauer's flesh, and they stretched and snapped as the creature was ripped off its prey. Vorkosigan flung it into the sand and stamped on it as Dubauer fell to the ground and curled up on his side. Cordelia tried to pull his hands away from his face. He was making strange, hoarse noises, and his body shook. Another seizure, she thought, but then realized with a shock that he was weeping. Oh my God, you guys. This was too awful. This was too awful. I felt this so... There is a point, you guys. This is a weird comparison to make, but I think if you know the movie well enough, you'll know what I'm talking about. In The Mummy, with Brendan Fraser, there is a character who is... has his, like, eyes taken out and his tongue taken out and stuff to give the mummy back a body. But he is still alive. And eventually, this dude shows up to, I think, take his heart. It's the last thing that the mummy is going to need. And this man is so pitiful because he isn't able to defend himself in any way and has already been through such torment. And this just reminded me, like, I pictured that character in my head here. And this dude has already been through it. And then to have one of these things land on his fucking face is just so unfair. The spots where the tendrils had penetrated his skin were black in the center, surrounded by rings of red flesh that were beginning to swell alarmingly. There was a particularly nasty one at the corner of his eye. She plucked one of the remaining embedded tendrils out of his skin and found it burned her fingers with acid. Apparently, the creature had been coated all over with a similar poison, for Vorkosigan, God help me, was kneeling with his hand in the stream. So he gives her some antibiotic to put over the burns on him. I hesitate to call them burns, but they're like chemical burns. And then he has a pill and he says, I only have 4 of these, but it's a really powerful painkiller and that should get him through the night. And later on, he starts rationing those out to himself because his leg is fucked up. So he does this thing here because he doesn't know how to start a fire to roast this meat. And he pulls his plasma, let's see where it is, a plasma arc power cartridge off his belt. He doesn't have the plasma arc, but he's got the cartridge. And she's like, if you do that, somebody's going to see that the crater that it forms if you use this, and they'll know where we are. And so what he does is, I don't know if he shoots at it or how he explodes it, but he does it right near the river so that the river curves into it and sort of covers up the crater, making it look like it's just a bend in the water. And it creates fire all around it, so he is able to grab one of the flaming torches and use that to start a fire. So let's see, I'm trying to find the spot here where from spaceman to caveman in 3 days. How we imagine our civilization is in ourselves when it's really in our things. And he says, you seem to carry it on the inside. One does one's duty. Some people find their duty more elastic. Or were you in love with him? With Dubauer? Heavens no, I'm no cradle snatcher. He was a good kid, though. I'd like him to get home to his family. Do you have a family? And later on, she realizes that that question can very easily be, are you married? That was my first thought instantly. When he says, do you have a family? I'm like, oh shit, not him trying to find out if she's attached. Like, that was actually my reaction when he says, were you in love with him? Because it felt for me like he was already kind of having a vibe. And the just sensation here is very much like just trying to suss out what your deal is. That's all. So she says that she has a mom and brother, but her dad died. And unfortunately, she saw his like plane explode. It was like a ship of some kind. But he tells her that his mother was half Baton, which is not something that is usual. My maternal grandfather was Prince Zav Vorbara, the diplomat. He held the post of ambassador to Beta Colony for a time in his youth before the first Sadagandan War. I hope I'm saying that right. I believe my grandmother was in your Bureau for Interstellar Trade. After my mother died, and he pauses when he says died, and I'm like, yeah, that was ugly. Whatever happened to her was bad. And we find out later, indeed it was. And Yuri Vobara's civil war was brought to an end. I spent some school vacations at the prince's home in the capital. He was at odds with my father, though, before and after that war, being of different political parties. Zav was the leading light of the progressives in his day, and of course my father is part of the last stand of the old military aristocracy. I'm not going to read this whole conversation because I have a lot more to get through here. But in summary, there are these like two parties, and he has been on his father's side for the most part. But he is like, honestly, I try to stay out of it as much as I can. It's all fucked my family over time and time again, so I just try to avoid it. But I do think we got to take on these bureaucrats because they think they're the future, but he calls it sewage flowing downhill. This is when we have the fight with the other crab things that come for the remains of the creature that they ate, which is what leads them later to having to return to their oatmeal and blue cheese dressing, because these things are not like the ones that were like in the area that they started where it was like just 3 of them. They run in packs and are apparently larger. And she is the one that is able to sense that she puts together 2 and 2 about the floating things and that they are electrolyzing water, which means they are full of hydrogen, which means that they are flammable. And so she is able to poke them with a, what do you call it? With a, oh my God, let's see. I'm trying to find the thing. Yeah, a torch. Right. She actually catches her hair on fire. Doesn't realize it until she feels him patting her on the back and is like, what does he do? And then she realizes, oh God, I burned my hair off. She must look a fright at this point. And he tries to like save one of these things. He captures the balloon guy in his shirt to try and, in case they get attacked later, use it again as a sort of explosive. But when they wake up, it says had died and deflated during the night, turning into a horrible gelid blob. I think it's gelid or gelid. Gelid, which means icy and or extremely cold. Oh, I thought gelid meant like gel-like, but it means cold. I didn't know that. Did you guys hear that word before? I never heard that word before. Interesting. Okay. So eventually there's a point where they're coming across all kinds of creatures. He basically stands on the equivalent of like a fire ant nest to take a piss, and they go up his pants. But this is when she notices that his leg has some like what looks like blood poisoning happening. And he's trying to act like it's no big deal, but it's very clear as time goes on that it's really bothering him. And he says that it's maybe a day and a half until they reach the cache of supplies. And there is the possibility that somebody will be there before he gets there, but he's hoping that the location of it has remained secret. He's just not sure if it has or not. Let's see. I'm not going anywhere but a Barrier prison cell for a while. Funny how one's standards change. After this trek, it will seem like the lap of luxury. I'll try to see it doesn't come to that, he smiled. His eyes bothered her, and his smile. His curtness she could meet and match with her own flippancy, guarding herself as with a fencer's foil. His kindness was like fencing with the sea, her strokes going soft and losing all volition. She flinched from the smile, and his face fell, then became closed and grave again. Oh, he's sad. He likes her and wants her to like him. And she does, but she's not showing it. And he doesn't like it. And it's sad. You guys. I was just like, no. So, chapter 3 starts with him very fucked up now in the leg and asking her to talk to him to keep his mind off it. He's also taking his painkillers like by the half, which it's bad, So they have a little bit of talk about like commanding vessels, and the way that, and I love this. She says something about, I can't imagine how cave women cared for families. And he says, well, they probably worked together. I'm sure you could have handled it. You have the competence one would look for in a mother of warriors. And she's thinking for a second, like, is he fucking with me? But I'm like, nah, girl, you are very competent. And it's clear that is some shit that appeals to him. And her response is, save me from that. To pour your life into sons for 18 or 20 years and then have the government take them away and waste them cleaning up after some failure of politics? No thanks. I never really looked at it that way, allowed Vorkosigan. He was quiet for a time, stumping along with his stick. Suppose they volunteered. Do your people have no ideal of service? Noblesse oblige? I suppose if they volunteered it would be different. However, I have no children, so fortunately I won't have to face those decisions. Are you glad or sorry? About children? She glanced at his face. He seemed to have no awareness of having hit a sore point dead on. They just haven't come my way, I guess. Interesting. So, the conversation turns to their parents. And he, there's the description of his mother being killed by a death squad. And she doesn't realize when he starts this story that he was there for it. But it becomes clear and she is increasingly horrified. And he says, I grabbed a table knife, but right in front of me there had been a carving knife. If only I had grabbed it instead. I might as well have struck him with a spoon. He just picked me up and threw me across the room. I was 11, small for my age. I was always small for my age. He cornered her against the far wall. He sucked his lower lip between his teeth and chewed it, just short of breaking the skin to bleed. Odd how many details come back when you talk about something. I thought I had forgotten more. And he sees that she is very upset by this and is like, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm talking so much. And she's like, you know what? And decides to share something of her own and says, I understand what you mean about talking, bringing things up, and describes the explosion of her father's ship. Then the blank vision, not blackness, but the silver purple glow for days after. I had almost forgotten about being blinded till just now. He stared at her. That's exactly... I was about to say he fired a sonic grenade into her stomach. I couldn't hear anything after that for quite some time, as if all sound had gone off the scale of human reception. Total noise, emptier of meaning than silence. Yes. How strange that he should know exactly what I felt. He says it better, though. I cannot get over this. I love this. It's such a great way to have them both, like, bonding over this trauma that they each experience. And they're different situations. Very, very different. But there is, like, a particular aspect of them that these traumas that they can, like, really understand about each other. And I like it. It's a nice little symmetry. And she asks about, like, combat and the difference between, you know, up close and far away. And he's just like, up close is just a very different experience. You can almost pretend it's not real when it's from a distance, like it's a game. But he says, feeling life pass out under your hands, seeing that blank, unoccupied corpse, you see your own death in the face of your victim. Yet he had betrayed my honor. I'm not sure I quite understand that. Yes, anger seems to make you stronger, not weaker like me. I wish I understood how you do that. It was another one of his weird, unmanageable compliments. I love it. I love it so much. And I really wonder, does my anger make me stronger or weaker? I don't know. I think probably weaker, mostly, occasionally stronger. I don't know. I think it depends on the anger and where it's coming from. So this is the point where they start talking about this guy named Radnov Bothari, who apparently hates Vorkosigan, but also has, like, a code of ethics that would prevent from killing him. And this is the part that Vorkosigan's been struggling with, is like, somebody knocked me out, yes, but they dragged me to a place where I wouldn't be killed. Which points to them not really liking me, because they could have probably outright saved me, but not hating me enough to do the thing they were told to do, or probably would have been expected of them. So I can't get who would do that. And when she explains that this guy was the one who knocked her out and, you know, got her partner, he's like, oh, okay, that's making a lot of stuff fall into place now. This makes sense. And they have also a conversation about the difference between using stunners and nerve disruptors. And she says, basically, I would rather have a stunner, even though it's not necessarily going to, like, save me if somebody's willing to kill me, because at least I'd be willing to use it. Whereas a nerve disruptor, I would be afraid to even fire because it bothers me, you know? And he says that, yeah, I had a friend like that and he's dead now. Which, nothing shuts you down quite like somebody saying those words. Yeah, my friend was like you. They are now dead. Jesus Christ. And eventually, they reach the cache, but he's like, I don't want to get there. They don't reach it, but they're, like, close enough that he wants to stop because he doesn't want to go there in the dark in case there are people. And they're eating. And she is talking to him about, she first of all is like letting him have extra sleep because she knows if he doesn't make it, she won't either. And he says, you're not what I expected a female officer to be. You're as professional as any officer I've ever served with without once trying to be an imitation man. It's extraordinary. Which, that is an interesting statement. It's giving you're not like other girls, which I don't love, but also I don't know what the culture where he comes from is really like, so maybe that is sort of to be expected. I don't know. But anyway, they talk about marriage, and he has like arranged marriages for his cast, and she's just finding that impossible to comprehend. And she tells a story, and it's pretty clear from the get-go that it's about herself. She was socially inept. Everyone around her seemed to be finding their soulmates, and the older she grew, the more panicky she got about being left out. Quite pathetically anxious. She finally fell in love with a man with the most astonishing talent for turning gold into lead. She couldn't use a word like love or trust or honor in his presence without eliciting clever mockery. Pornography was permitted. Poetry, never. What a line. Ugh. I love that. Vicky's in the chat saying, FYI, Bothari and Radnov are two separate characters. I believe those are both last names. Ugh, my bad. Okay. I'm sure that'll get straightened out. They were of equal rank, and basically she's like, well, he persuaded her that she should stand down in his favor, and that he would like help her have children later, you know, children, in fact, to stand down in his favor. Quite the strategist. It ended soon after, thoroughly dry. She had no stomach for another lover after that. So you see, I think your old Baryarins may have been onto something after all. The inept need rules for their own protection. And then he tells a story. I knew a man once. He was married at 20 to a girl of high rank of 18. Arranged, of course, but he was very happy with it. He was away most of the time, on duty. She found herself free, rich, alone in the capital in the society of people. Not altogether vicious, but people older than herself, rich parasites, their parasites, users. She was courted, and it went to her head. Not her heart, I think. She took lovers as those around her did. Looking back, I don't think she felt any more emotion for them than vanity and pride of conquest, but at the time, he had built up a false picture of her in his mind, and having it suddenly shattered, this boy had a very bad temper. It was his particular curse. He resolved on a duel with her lovers. She had two on her string, or her on theirs, I can't say which. He didn't care who survived or if he were arrested. He imagined he was dishonored, you see. He arranged to have each meet him at a deserted place about a half-hour apart. The first was another pig-headed young aristocrat like himself, and he played out the game by the rules. He knew the use of the two swords, fought with flair, and almost killed my friend. The last thing he said was that he'd always wanted to be killed by a jealous husband, only at age 80. The second was a high government minister, an older man. He wouldn't fight, although he knocked him down and stood him up several times. After the other, who had died with a joke in his mouth, he could hardly bear it. He finally slew him outright in the middle of his begging and left him there. He stopped at his wife's apartment to tell her what he'd done and returned to his ship to wait for arrest. This all happened in one afternoon. She was enraged, full of wounded pride. She would have dueled with him if she could. And she killed herself. Shot herself in the head with his service plasma arc. I wouldn't have thought it a woman's weapon, poison or cutting the wrists or something, but she was true Vor. It burned her face entirely away. She'd had the most beautiful imaginable face. Things worked out very strangely. It was assumed the two lovers had killed each other. I swear he never planned it that way, and that she'd killed herself in despondency. No one ever asked him the first question about it. And this is just a brutal story. I mean, I can't even imagine. And the way he wraps it up, he went through that whole afternoon like a sleepwalker or an actor, saying the expected lines, going through the expected motions, and at the end his honor was no better for it. Nothing was served. No point was proved. It was all as false as her love affairs, except for the deaths. They were real. So you see, you Baitons have one advantage. You at least permit each other to learn from your mistakes. I'm grieved for your friend. Does it seem very long ago? Sometimes. Over 20 years. They say that senile people remember things from their youth more clearly than those of last week. Maybe he's getting senile. I see. She took the story in like some strange spiked gift. Too fragile to drop, too painful to hold. That's a very, very good line. Love that. And the chapter ends with him falling asleep, feverish, and starting to shiver. And she takes a bedroll from Dubauer and covers him up with it. She's clearly feeling a little bit of a desire to help this guy that is, I think, more than just her own self-preservation. So, yeah, I am into it. I really enjoy, like, the way that they have gotten to know each other feels organic to me. The conversations and the way they each speak feel realistic and also distinct enough that I feel if there weren't indicators to tell us who we're speaking, I could probably be able to tell. And the whole setup with somebody probably having tried to kill him and her just sort of getting caught in the crossfire, I think is actually pretty interesting because there's a lot of, I'm covering the Red Rising series as well. And there are some scenarios in that series where fucking just regular people are getting swept up in shit because they just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'll often think about how much it sucks to be one of those people that this was not your fight. And you just wound up having coffee at the wrong cafe and some shit goes down. And that's basically what's happened here. Like, none of this had anything to do with her. And now it's like how she may die, and how her friend died. So I'm really curious if they were able to like find anybody for help if they're coming back or what's going on. So, all right, I got to wrap up, but thank you guys again so much for coming and hanging out. I see Jeff is here as well. Hi, Jeff. And thank you very much to Sofia for commissioning this episode. Appreciate you a lot. I hope you all are enjoying the coverage so far. Apologies for mispronouncing things, I'm sure. But like I said, I'll be starting the audiobook and hopefully that will improve. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.